The following podcast may contain adult language and conversations revolving around situations not suitable for immature audiences. Spoilers and general political incorrectness can often be expected, so listener discretion is advised.
They must be destroyed on sight!
Okay, we're back. After a week of hiatus, we're back for episode, I believe, 58 now of They Must Be Destroyed on Sight, a movie podcast, and I'm your host, Lee Russell. I'm joined by my stalwart co-host, Daniel Harper. How are you doing, sir?
I'm actually awake today, so we can record. I fell asleep last week before we could record, and I don't mind admitting that to our dozens of listeners that I was exhausted at 10:30 at night, collapsed into a state of sleep, much like a small child. So,
But you're a working man now, so you have an excuse, and it's actually probably for the best, because if anyone listened to the little intermission episode I did, and an alarming amount of people actually did listen to it.
I was one of them. I'm holding you back, Lee. I mean, I'm just. Why did you even bother inviting me on to begin with? So,
no, first off, it was terrible. My voice sounded terrible. And it's probably a good thing we didn't record last week, because I was still suffering from a cold. So every 30 seconds or so, I was trying to snuffle back about 30 pounds of snot in my nose. If you only saw the amount of edits I did on that half-hour episode, you'd be amazed. We're going to be talking about two very interesting semi-noir sort of crime films. There are definitely heavy noir influences in both of them, but you can also sort of argue they're also horror films straight up to some degree. Of course, we're going to be talking about The Lodger from 1944 and 1945's Hangover Square. And after this, we're going to be doing Inherent Vice, and that'll be the cap off of our sort of initial look into noir films and crime films. And we'll be getting into maybe some sci-fi, and then jumping over to some sex comedies for the next little while. So I'm definitely looking forward to that, too. That'll be a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, me too. It's been really fun doing noir films, but it's also like, okay, time to move on. Let's do something a little different. But I rewatched both of these films today, and not to jump ahead, but it's interesting how much, because we kind of started with M, not quite, because that was 49, and then we did Dawn of the Dead. So M was kind of like the movie that we watched. It was kind of like, oh, let's do some crime films, let's do some noir, and both of these films kind of draw heavily from that film.
Yeah.
And then when you think about Inherent Vice, that clearly draws heavily from The Long Goodbye, Altman's Long Goodbye, which was the first film in our. So it actually, there's a little bit of a nice symmetry that we've kind of inadvertently created here. So. Yeah,
just the films we've picked kind of have opened our eyes to some connections between stuff that we probably didn't even know beforehand. It's been a lot of fun. It's actually been a lot of fun just sort of exploring these films and picking up on stuff.
I have a ton of noir films that I've just been like downloading, so I can watch them later. And I'll if I run across anything that's really, really special, I'll definitely throw it on for the next time we do a something like this, because I think I would love to do more noir films down the line. But I think the audience might be a little tired of listening to us talk about noir films. But I'm just kind of like, I don't know, I could do these all the time. Like, I could just do a noir podcast, honestly.
We've been joking about how we could just keep going on and just like start it into a noir podcast totally, and we probably could, but we're not going to do that.
Paul would never forgive us, really. That's the reason. He would come with a knife and like stab us in the heart, and he would.
Yeah. Although I really do wish he had been able to show up for this one, because these were two noir films that he would have definitely been into. So
I hopefully he'll get a chance to see them at some point, and he can give us his thoughts at that point.
Yeah, Paul is MIA at the moment. Anyone who is wondering, we've put his picture out on a milk carton. So
I've wrapped his body in a sheet and thrown it in a burning pyre.
Ooh. Foreshadowing. So yeah, we'll get to our films here in a little while, but we do have quite a bit of housekeeping to take care of. So First thing I want to mention, thanks to my friend Jim Sear, he brought to my attention the fact that the last few episodes we've done, the MP3 file, the raw MP3 file, if you downloaded it from iTunes, has been really big. And the reason that is because I am, and Daniel can attest to this, I'm a ham-fisted Luddite who is backwards, and everything I do is just fucking ridiculous the way I produce this podcast. For the most part, what I do is I build the YouTube version of this podcast first. I'm just not so savvy with Audacity where I can just build the entire MP3 file in Audacity and make it look good. Eventually I'll get there, but for the most part, what I do is I build the YouTube version first, and then I strip the audio off that, and then I upload that to our Podbean site. So what I was doing for the last little while was I was stripping the audio of this new program I downloaded, and I didn't realize that I was using the incorrect MP3 format to download from. So I was using I guess it's called original MP3, which is like the most high quality MP3 you can have. So all these episodes were like 200 fucking megs or more, megabytes or more. So anyone who is experiencing problems with that, I apologize, because Jim was nice enough to point out that he was downloading our MP3s from iTunes and they were filling up his phone. So I looked into the program. I could see I have other options, so I will downgrade it. We're not exactly the most high-quality audio out there anyway, so it won't be a big problem. I apologize if that was a problem for anyone listening that way. But thanks, Jim, for pointing that out, because otherwise I never would have fucking caught it. I don't pay attention to shit like that all too often. So
I think I did notice that, but I'm also just didn't care because I do download the MP3s directly, and I'm like, Lee could probably cut down on the quality just a little bit here, but who am I to judge? You do your thing, like it's fine.
That's great. You just letting me fucking crash and burn without saying anything. That's awesome. I appreciate it.
Well, a decent quality MP3 is about a megabyte a minute, and so a 200. A 4-hour podcast should be about 200 megabytes, honestly. So some of them are deservedly that size.
Well, we've been speculating that once we get to like Day of the Dead or Night of the Living Dead, it'll end up being a fucking 4-hour podcast. But oh man! And speaking of that, I want to mention we got two really nice shout outs in the last week from two podcasts. The guys at Slaughter Film, although they didn't shout us out on the air, they actually showed us out on their show notes. They did an episode on Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead. And of course, Slaughter Film, who just have this knack for making this incredibly casual podcast that at the same time is incredibly concise and keeps their time restraints locked down very well. They managed to talk about Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead with less time than we did. Hour and a half for both films, and they managed to cover a lot of the same stuff we covered on Dawn in almost 3 hours.
Maybe if we stopped drinking while we record, we could do similar things.
Perhaps.
But why bother?
Yeah, I don't really want to stop drinking. So
I like to think that we give quantity over quality on this show.
Yeah, but they did a really great job, by the way. I will link the episode in the show notes. It's an enjoyable episode, and Forrest and Corey are both awesome. Just enjoyable to listen to both of them, and they covered both Dawn and Day that did really, really well. They also just recently did one of their Slaughter Film Netflix sort of commentary nights, hangouts that they do every once in a while, and they did it for the new Pee Wee Herman film, Pee Wee's Big Holiday, that's on Netflix, I guess. I'm not necessarily a big Pee Wee Herman fan, but I actually did watch their thing and watch the film with it, and it's enjoyable. They always do a really good commentary because they were basically just drinking tequila and watching the film. So,
that sounds like the way to watch the film, really. One day, I haven't seen any of the Pee Wee Herman stuff in long enough that I'm just going to kind of let that go. But one day it might be interesting to do Pee Wee's Big Adventure, just as like a film series or something,
If we did like a Tim Burton month or something like that, right?
Yeah, that would be a way to go. We have too many planned movies already to ever think about doing a Tim Burton month. Yeah.
We also got a nice little shout out from Pex Lives, their latest episode. Long fucking episode, by the way. They started off talking about Stephen King movie adaptations. They moved on to finally talking about, I guess it was Terror of the Autons, the Doctor Who episode. In between that, they're basically talking about the horrors of capitalism gone awry. And
it sounds like Pex Lives to a T. Yeah, no.
Yeah. But at one point they actually did mention us, and so thank you very much. I was actually just totally surprised. I was at work listening to the episode, and all of a sudden, oh, by the way, the excellent podcast, They Must Be Destroyed on Sight. And I was like, oh, you wonderful, beautiful fucker, you.
Yeah, that's James Murphy, who has become a big fan of ours, and whom I spoke to last night actually, and he was going to put that out, but I doubt it's going to happen because if you think we get drunk on this podcast, this was a very I'm only going to say as James, I have that audio saved, and I now have blackmail material, so just keep the money coming,
I saw some allusions to that on Twitter, yes.
It was a good time. James and I, it was a very fun conversation, but it was definitely, it was very clear about halfway through that James is not actually going to release this as a podcast. So.
Right on. We do have a few comments here. Most of these are basically pertaining to our Eddie Coyle Zero Effect episode that we did 2 weeks ago. First off, Mike Murphy from Badass Boobs and Body Counts podcast. He said, continuing this trend of talking about excretions from the anal cavity, which is becoming an alarming theme through both of our podcasts, I guess. He said, for the record, I didn't take issue with the anal leakage. That was Mark. I think I said it was unfair of him to fail the film due to one quick scene with poop in it, which I didn't see due to the fact that he was using the fast forward button. How this spills, no pun intended, over into another show and why we're still mentioning it is beyond me. It might be one of those touchstone moments in podcast history. Only time will tell. And he said, good episode, guys.
Yeah, no, for me, I agree that Mike was not the one who was he was defending the anal sex scene, at least kind of going like, really, you're gonna like he had the same bone that I did to pick with his own show. So I just thought it was amusing to actually go and watch the scene and go like, how bad is this really? And it's really, I mean, it's ridiculous to even like care that much about it. So, but yeah, no. That's all I'm going to say about anal leakage, at least for now. Yeah. Maybe down the line, we'll see.
We need to really put a fucking cap on that subject. We just should not mention anal leakage for another couple of years. Really,
put a cap on anal leakage. Is that the plan?
Put a plug in it. Yeah,
just plug it all up and make sure there's no leakage.
Yes. Our friend Jack Graham, being the negative Nelly that he is, said, I can't say I was impressed by either of this week's movies myself. Zero Effect had some great ideas in it, but I don't think any of them really worked. He said Kim Dickens was the best thing in it, but it was like she was in a different movie to everyone else. Yeah.
I've been thinking about this since I read that comment, and I don't even think I disagree with Jack on that. That I think that's the point, is that Kim Dickens is giving the kind of a nuanced, kind of grounded, real performance, and that to a degree what we're seeing with Daryl Zero at the beginning of the film is that he's kind of performing this eccentricity. And that as he continues his relationship with Gloria, he becomes more grounded himself, and you even see it in one of the final lines that he has in the film when he's talking to her on the phone. He has the he tries to say one of these Zero-esque aphorisms, and then like corrects himself like, oh no, I got I got sloppy. And I think that's a problematic trope in itself, and we could certainly kind of talk about what that means, but I don't think that that's unintentional by the film. It is a weird film, and it is a kind of, I understand that the film didn't work for Jack because it's kind of messing with tone is one of the toughest things to do in kind of narrative art. But I see his critique, but I understand it, but I don't agree with it. I still think the film basically works.
And as far as Eddie Coyle goes, I think we both kind of agreed there was definitely some pacing issues and flaws in that one. Like there's a lot of in that film that doesn't necessarily translate very well to modern movie audiences. And it is a really slow movie in a lot of ways.
I suspect that one is one where played better in '74 than it does, or played differently anyway. And I don't think that. I mean, I think Jack is certainly, kind of cognizant of that. I think that some of the dramatic tension is out of it. I think that maybe we just forgave it a little bit more than he did, and the stuff that works really works, I think. But there's a lot of it that just kind of doesn't,
Yeah. Our friend Stuart Bulk from the Midnight Movie Cowboy said, excellent episode, guys. I had never heard of either of these films, and now I really want to see them both. And damn you, Daniel, for talking about Deadwood. Now I have to rewatch that masterpiece of the series again.
Well, you're welcome. For getting to rewatch Deadwood, that's never a bad thing, in my opinion. And hey, let's do a Deadwood podcast. Who wants to do a Deadwood podcast with me?
I don't.
Apparently, that's what I do. Is I just start collecting podcasts.
Yeah, I really don't. I think I saw a couple episodes of that, and the only charm I get from it is that one of the characters' name's like Swearingen or Swearinger.
Swearinger.
Yeah, something like that.
I'm surprised you didn't get anything out of it. Like that's a great show. That's a brilliant show.
I liked it, but it's like I've seen all this in about the million fucking westerns I've seen.
It's a film or it's a TV series that definitely needs a few. I mean, it kind of plays on people not necessarily knowing what kind of modern westerns or kind of revisionist westerns did, and kind of expecting it to be a little bit more generic. Once you get 6 or 7 episodes in, and particularly in the second season, it really becomes a much richer experience. It's really about the community more so than it's about like any individual character. But I think if you're not on board with Swearingen, from the beginning, you're kind of not gonna go for the series. It's amazing how much of that performance was it prefigures Daniel Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood. I think in a lot of ways. There's a lot of kind of similarities between those two. And sorry, I'm completely not talking about anything that we're talking about today. But I really like Deadwood, and I think you should give it another shot sometime.
Yeah, I probably will. I mean, I am a big Western fan. Like I'm a major fucking Western fan, and I think maybe that's one of the reasons why I didn't necessarily get into it so much, is like the same reason like I don't really get into The Walking Dead so much, because I've just seen so many fucking zombie movies and stuff, and I watched episodes of it and it just never really connected with me as being anything interesting, right?
Yeah, I think that there is a significant quality difference between The Walking Dead and Deadwood personally, but I definitely see that. I mean, and part of the issue that I have with a lot of stuff, particularly again sci-fi stuff, is that I grew up reading the 1940s and 1950s, kind of science fiction classics, and there's very little that like people think is interesting and science fiction television that wasn't done better in a story in 1943. It is kind of difficult. I mean, we all kind of bring our own perspectives and backgrounds to these things, and there's no judgment about like not liking something. I don't think we should ever feel like you should feel bad for liking or not liking a particular piece of art. What's interesting is being able to talk about it and then justify it. Jack, even though Jack can't stand Jess Franco, I don't even know if he's seen the two films that I think are actually quite good from Jess Franco. I don't know if he's even seen them. But,
well, did he not say that Soledad Miranda was the only thing worth talking about when it comes to Franco?
Yeah, pretty much. He was like, you can be a fan of Soledad Miranda and just kind of shit on Franco at the same time. And I'm like, I'm a little bit more nuanced than that, but Jack is allowed to be wrong. We're still friends. It's fine.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of wonder if he's ever seen Franco's version of Dracula with Christopher Lee, because that's actually quite an interesting film.
I have not seen that, but now apparently I do. I need to see it,
because it's probably one of the more, in a lot of ways, one of the more solid adaptations of Dracula that's ever been put out there.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. Now I have to kind of seek that out and give it a shot.
Yeah.
But it probably doesn't have lesbian vampires in it, and that's
I don't.
The key.
Yeah, I don't recall any. I don't recall any lesbian vampires or anyone being killed in ecstasy. So
apparently, this isn't something I need to.
Last comment here from our friend Cameron Sullivan, who's on the Facebook group. We have a Facebook group, by the way. They must be destroyed. So have you heard of it, Daniel?
No, I haven't. Really? We have a Facebook group?
We have a Facebook group. It is the single best way to get in contact with us. Leave questions, comments, and suggestions. They
Wow.
must be destroyed on site on Facebook.
So Mark Zuckerberg did something right, finally.
Well, I don't know how much he had to do with it anyway. He probably just sat back and collected the check while a bunch of programmer geeks did the actual Facebook. So,
That's fair. That's fair.
yeah, so those programmer geeks. Thank you. But Cameron says, Eddie Coyle still holds up for me, but it's a slow burn, and nowadays patients will be tested on half of the older neo-noirs from the 70s. Remember getting so annoyed when people were raving about 2010's The Town, and I was like, have you ever seen Heat or Friends of Eddie Coyle? That's a good comment. I agree with that because a lot of people, and I guess it's, the younger people, and I don't want to sound like a fucking disgruntled old man now saying, oh, you younger kids don't know shit. But, I mean, there's definitely a lot of people who, they're at the age right now, they're maybe in their early 20s or whatever, and they haven't watched a lot of older movies. So their only reference is, like, stuff like The Town. That's probably the only Boston crime film they've ever seen. So they've probably never heard of Eddie Coyle.
I never heard of Eddie Coyle until you told me about it. And you can't blame people. This goes back to the same issue. You can't blame people for being ignorant. There are tons of things I am blatantly ignorant about that I run into all the time. It's how you respond to that ignorance.
Yeah.
Kind of it's. I will tell you, there's an anecdote where I actually worked with a guy who is 23, and we were talking at work, and I said, oh, I have a couple podcasts, and I do a Dr. Who podcast, and then I do this old movie podcast, and he just did not understand the idea of why you would do a podcast about old movies. Just didn't get it. Like, why would you do a podcast about old movies as opposed to like what's the like didn't understand like film as an artistic medium, and people would like to kind of talk about themes and ideas and stuff. Like, the only reason to talk about something on a podcast for him, and I'm interpreting. I mean, he's a very, very nice guy. I like working with him. But it was like he just did not get the concept that like people might find value in movies that were older than like 2 or 3 years ago. Just didn't get the concept.
Why would you talk about old books? Why would you read old books and talk about them? There
are lots of people who kind of feel that way. I mean, there is this kind of the fallacy of newness. That only what's new is really worthwhile or valid, and getting out of that mindset is part of what I like to try to do on this show, is to kind of go back and look at some old stuff. I mean, it just kind of became this like it was a moment. I'm like, oh, I don't get that perspective, but I understand it, but it's so like, but I feel like the same thing where people would say, well, John Wayne did this in 1953, so why should I care about something in 2016 that does, it is sort of the same mistake, just done in the opposite way.
It does go both ways to a certain degree. I agree with that, but that sort of goes with that sort of snobby attitude of all remakes are useless and pointless, where it's not true, because there's definitely a lot of remakes that sort of expand upon the original idea and explore new avenues, and that's incredibly useful. I mean, there's plenty of shitty remakes out there as well that don't do shit, but I mean, I think it's always better to look into the past and to see where these things came from, and to talk about it and to explore those ideas and see how they translate in a modern context. But if all you're doing is absorbing modern stuff and not looking back, I don't think you have a frame reference for context or anything. I don't think you can intelligently talk about the art if you all you're going on is the 2009 version of The Lodger, for fuck's sakes. I don't think you have any real context of the original story and the value of the original story, and I want to strangle your friend at work. I just want to say.
Well, he's a nice guy. You should not want to strangle him,
okay.
But. No, he's definitely he sees things differently, and it's just a
I just strangle him.
He might listen to this podcast, so I'm we're going to be nice.
Can I just strangle him a little bit? Not kill him
with a thuggy cord.
Yeah, with a thuggy cord, of course, and just get him to the point where he passes out enough to have some sort of euphoric sort of epiphany where he finally realizes that there is value in old movies.
Let's just sit him down and show him Hangover Square instead, and kind of go from there.
Okay, well, we'll go your way this time.
Okay.
This time.
Okay. This time.
The other thing from Cameron Sullivan, I was talking to him actually on a post on a thread in Midnight Movie Cowboys Facebook group where we were just sort of discussing the new Magnificent Seven remake that's coming out with Denzel Washington, and there's this like really diverse ethnic cast in this new one. And I was kind of discussing with him where I felt like, okay, that's cool, that's all right, but at the same time, it kind of felt unauthentic to a certain degree, because the idea that you would have a bunch of white guys with a black cowboy and an Asian cowboy and stuff like that, kind of stretching it a little bit for the time period as far as being kind of authentic. We moved on to actually genre mashups. We were talking about Red Sun with Charles Bronson and Toshiro Mifune, and he suggested that we do an episode sometime where we basically just talk about our favorite sort of genre mashups like Red Sun and stuff like that. So
that sounds, I'd be down for that.
Yeah,
lots of good stuff there.
Yeah. So I'm actually just going to sort of put it out there to our listeners on the Facebook group and stuff. If you have any like sort of suggestions for like genre mashups that you want us to sort of talk about, and just sort of jog our memory too, because I was trying to think of stuff and I was having a little hard time thinking about it. So
obviously, for me, an obvious one would be like Shaun of the Dead, for instance. Which is obviously zombie romantic comedy, the Zom rom-com. Yeah. That's just one of those real classics for me. But it's hard, like, kind of, you put me on the spot. I'm like, now what's a really great one,
Yeah.
Tampopo. Tampopo is one of my favorite because that's essentially it's a Western. It's a Western hero goes around and finds the greatest noodle shop in existence. And it's set in Japan. So it's basically a sort of a John Wayne Western, but set in noodle restaurants, and it's intentionally a comedy. I think it was produced by Kurosawa. I could be mistaken on that. This is from I think 86 or 87, something like that. So, but I haven't seen the film in almost 20 years now, but it's held a very strong place in my memory. And I keep thinking I need to revisit it. So maybe we need to cover that on the show at some point.
Nice. Yeah, I'd be up for that. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Cameron. We'll take that under advisement and try to come up with something at some point. Sounds like a good little sort of break episode between our little series that we do. So that'll be fun. So I think we can move on now to anything we've watched in the last while. I'm going to forego talking about anything because I think the episode's long enough as it is, but I know you have something you want to talk about, Daniel, so go into it.
Sure. I only saw one, and I actually saw The 7-Year Itch for the first time. This is on Netflix right now. Somehow I've just avoided watching it. It's not anything. I don't have an issue with it. I just, somehow I'd never seen it. I was looking for something kind of mindless and fun that I could put on, and I'm like, 7-Year Itch. Watch the Marilyn Monroe. Be adorable. Wow, this is a film that, seeing it now, I'm kind of like it. It's definitely not the. For me, it doesn't hold up, I think, as well as I would have liked it to. But man, Billy Wilder, we need to do some Billy Wilder films on this show because he's such an interesting filmmaker. He kind of has this way of both exploring this kind of middle class, middle-aged male, American male, kind of libido, and kind of interrogating those values at the same time, and doing it within the confines of a kind of silly comedy. But it's kind of like, for me, there are two other Billy Wilder films that kind of do these ideas better. 2 years later, or 4 years later, he would make Some Like It Hot, which kind of does the better version of the kind of sex pop Marilyn Monroe in one of her final films. And The Apartment, which I know I've mentioned on this show a few times, which does the kind of marital infidelity thing, but kind of does it from the opposite side. It does it from the perspective of the woman who is, being led along, and does it in a more kind of realistic, harsher way that I really respond to. So The 7-Year Itch, it was a fun watch. It's got some issues, but it's definitely it's a classic for a reason, and if for nothing else, it's a historical artifact. It's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, and Marilyn Monroe, she gets overlooked for her acting talent. I think in a lot of ways. She's actually a really good actress. One of my favorite roles from her is she plays like a gangster's mole in the Asphalt Jungle. Which
The Asphalt Jungle is on my short list to watch as part of like I was watching a lot of noir films at the beginning of as kind of sidelines, and then just fell out of that as I just ran out of time to do it. But that one is on my short list.
Asphalt Jungle is really good. It's an excellent early sort of heist film, and she is stunning in it. Like she is absolutely. This is for me personally, and I've seen actually quite a few films with her in it. This is the best she's ever looked in a film, as far as I'm concerned. Really, really good, and she just does a great job. Like,
and that's from 52?
51 or 52, something like that. Yeah, her part is a part that shouldn't really have any sort of weight to it. Like, it's kind of underwritten and everything, but she really shines in it. She brings something to that role that was not in the script, as far as I'm concerned. So, it's definitely one to check out for anyone interested. And actually, that's kind of a classic of the genre anyway. So I would hope a lot of people have already seen it. But if not, the Asphalt Jungle, check it out. I think we can get right into our movies now, Daniel. So we're going to start with The Lodger from 1944.
This, Inspector?
Oh, some poor chap beat his sweetheart to death with this.
Why did he do it?
Well, we've never known exactly, but my belief at this moment is that she failed to answer some perfectly simple question.
In that case, Inspector, I'll come to tea on Friday.
Thank you, Miss Langley.
Does anybody know why he commits these murders?
The Ripper must have a motive, but no man alive can even guess at what it might be. And the women who could know are dead.
Yours is a beauty which could destroy me.
Is that a compliment?
Or it could destroy you. Have you thought of that?
That's a very queer thing to say, and besides, I don't think I'm beautiful at all. I take a great deal of trouble to give that impression, though.
It is one thing if a woman is beautiful merely for herself. But when she exhibits the loveliness of her body upon the stage...
Directed by John Brom, written by Barry Lyndon. Screenplay, Mary Belloc Lowndes is the novel that this is based upon. And starring Merle Oberon as Kitty Langley, George Saunders as Inspector John Warwick, who actually people probably would know him as the voice of Shere Khan in the Disney's The Jungle Book from '67. Oh. He actually had a pretty long career, but that's probably one of his more notable roles. The excellent Laird Cregar as Mr. Slade, Cedric Hardwicke as Robert Bonting, Sarah Allgood as Ellen Bonting, Aubrey Mather as the Superintendent Sutherland, Queenie Leonard as Daisy the Maid, Doris Lloyd as Jenny, David Clyde as Sergeant Bates, and Helena Pickard as Annie Rowley. And I'll let you get into your synopsis there, Daniel.
All right, no problem. The film opens late on a foggy night in Victorian London. The bars close in the Whitechapel district, and a young woman separates herself from the crowds of drunken revelers and ducks into an alleyway, seemingly on her way home. Off-screen, a piercing scream is heard. Jack the Ripper is on the loose. In what is surely an unrelated plot thread, a middle-aged woman, Sarah Bunting, Sarah Allgood, is renting some rooms to make a bit of extra money so the patriarch of the home, Robert Bunting, Sir Cedric Hardwicke, may rebuild his failing business. So when a looming figure carrying a black bag introduces himself to Sarah as Mr. Slade and pays 4 weeks' rent in advance, everyone basically turns a blind eye to whatever eccentricities he might have. Slade, Laird Cregar, keeps odd hours, refers to his experiments that may require large amounts of direct heat, and always uses the back door. He also has a strange aversion to actresses of all kinds, which becomes a bit of a point of contention when he discovers that Bunting's niece also shares the home, and that the young woman is none other than the stunning stage performer Kitty Langley, Merle Oberon. If you have yet to guess that Slade is the killer, I suspect you have never seen a film before. As the film continues, the murders do as well, including a past or prime stage actress named Annie Rowley, Helena Pickard, who formerly occupied the lovely Kitty's dressing room. As Kitty was one of the last to see Annie alive, she is questioned by Police Inspector John Warwick, George Sanders, and a romance begins to bloom that includes a first date to Scotland Yard's famous Black Museum. The murders continue, suspicion onto the mysterious lodger heightens, but since there seems little solid evidence, the concerns are poo-pooed by the aging Robert. Nevertheless, the Buntings agree not to allow the young Kitty to be home alone with the lodger, a measure that makes it seem as if they maybe should have mentioned their concerns to Kitty herself, but what use could it be to worry such a lovely young actress? Slade confronts Kitty, telling her of her great beauty in his eyes, but in language that comes straight out of a men's rights activist, he essentially calls actresses painted whores and says that true beauty was represented by his now-deceased brother, who besides being astonishingly handsome, was an amazingly gifted painter. Some detective work later, the inspector has collected a police dragnet to protect Kitty. After a performance, the first seen by Slade as he had made excuses to avoid her performances in the past, she is confronted by the lodger and begs that she will do whatever he likes, be as still as his beloved waters of the Thames, if he spares her life. The police come in the nick of time, wounding Slade in the neck with a shot, but he escapes into the back of the theater. Another failed attempt at murdering the actress later, Slade is surrounded by the police and leaps into the river, apparently dead by drowning or by blood loss. We end on Kitty's face, unable to understand just why a man would do such horrible things.
Excellent. And since you've just watched these two films again tonight, I'll let you start with your thoughts on this one, Daniel.
All right. So The Lodger, kind of the my original thought was just kind of like, this isn't as good as Hangover Square, which I did watch first. And I'll kind of get into that a little bit here shortly. Rewatching it because I did. Having a week off actually allowed me to rewatch both films. Mm-hmm. I did find I liked The Lodger better on a second watch through. I think that, part of the issue is that, so much of this has just kind of been done again better. Mm-hmm. Or at least in kind of more modern terms. It's been ripped off so many times, and it's been kind of used. A lot of these themes and such have been used so many times. I was, honestly, on first watch through, I was expecting, Cregar is so obviously the killer in terms of the way things are shot. I was expecting there to be a twist at the end that he's not really the killer, which I believe is how the 1927 version ends, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. I did read a lot of kind of people talking about this film. There's kind of a little bit of a rich literature surrounding The Lodger, this 1944 version. I did find a couple of kind of blog posts and some stuff on TCM, which talk about how this prefigures so much of like the Hammer horror stuff and that sort of thing. And I do find Cregar is just magnetic. Cregar is amazing in the role, but I think in the cinematography direction, that German expressionist kind of direction is pretty brilliant. I mean, I'm very much down with the way this film looks. It's sumptuous. It's a gorgeous experience. Foggy London. I mean, it looks like it's shot on a backstage, but it's a gorgeous, gorgeous backstage. Yeah. But everything that isn't either cinematography, direction related, or Laird Cregar, I just kind of lost interest in almost completely. That's kind of the biggest fault in the film is it just he's good enough that nothing else really lives up to him, and that's kind of my overall impression of The Lodger.
I totally agree. Cregar is fucking fantastic in this film. He draws your attention from everything else in the film. His performance, and at this point, he was starting to cut weight because before this, he had a couple film roles where he had put on a lot of weight. He was a very big man to start with. He was
over 300 pounds and 6'4" at this point.
Yeah,
and we'll talk a little bit about his weight here. We kind of have to talk about these together. They're so closely connected in some ways. But sorry, continue. He was 300 pounds and 6'4".
Yeah, and he had cut some weight for this, and he brings this really interesting presence to this film that I would dare say there's a lot of sort of gay subtext to this. Cregar himself was a homosexual who was keeping that hidden at the time.
It was kind of an open secret among the Hollywood people, but it certainly wasn't known to the general public. And in fact, Daryl Zanuck, the producer, the studio head at the time, was like intentionally, basically telling Cregar to stop being so fucking gay, and got him dates with lovely young ladies to like convince the world that he was not flaming. But he was apparently very gay, and in fact, his lover had died just the year before in like a terrible, like a senseless murder sort of thing. And I think that that very clearly plays into his performance and his homosexuality. I mean, it's hard not to read this film in the light of his homosexuality in a lot of ways.
But he brings a very, I guess the best word to say is like sensitive. Very introspective kind of performance. There is, like, early on there is some doubt as to whether he is the killer or not. But I don't know, this performance is really fucking something. Like, I can see why they were very keen after this film to like bring him in similar films and like try to do a series, which was the original intent here. He just brings this really artistic sensitivity, a real emotional kind of performance that I really appreciated. I really enjoyed it. You can definitely sympathize with him. At some respects, he presents himself as an outsider and a quote-unquote weirdo, but all the characters around him just sort of chalk that up to, oh, he's an intellectual, he's an eccentric, he's, we just have to leave him to his devices and not question what he does because he's a doctor. Well,
and he's paying, I mean, the kind of the economic impulse. He's a gentleman. He's a weird guy, but he's paying us in advance for 4 whole weeks.
Yeah.
And it ends up being 20 pounds, and the entire amount of money that she needs in order to kind of rebuild this guy's business or whatever is 100 pounds. And so he gives her 20% of the total amount that she needs in one fell swoop. And the economic incentives absolutely, I think, speak to how this guy is able to kind of go about undetected. It's not that people don't have misgivings about him. It's that they're unwilling to interrogate those in favor of, they turn a blind eye because he's giving them money and because he's a member of this kind of wealthy upper class sort of this academic, this guy working as a pathologist in a university. I mean, that is an element of the film that I think is under discussed. Because I think that that was very clear to me on the first watch through even, and then watching it the second time, it's even more clear to what degree the Robert, the old man, essentially he's originally like, wait a minute, you let this guy rent this room, you didn't get any references, like he just moved in like tonight. And she's like, well, yeah, but he paid like 20 guineas. He paid 4 weeks in advance, and then from then on, he's like, hey, well, we don't know he's a killer. Come on, like he might be the killer, he might not. And lots of people have a black bag. What are you talking about? Come on, I got a black bag. I mean, he's he gets defensive, and I think that the characterization of some of the supporting cast gets a little wobbly at times because you kind of go, well, you already knew this, and this, and how did you not kind of put 2 and 2 together? And they're simultaneously like, well, we got to protect this young girl, but we can't say he did anything wrong. And I think that part of this is the kind of mid-40s performance style just kind of didn't allow for some of the psychological depth is kind of lost in the actors. And I think that Cregar is very modernistic in his performance in both of these films. He's not doing method. It's not like kind of that Streetcar Named Desire Brando style, but he's absolutely giving this very broad, a very big performance, but a very introspective performance as well. I mean, he's using his size to dominate the director, and Cregar himself use his size to dominate the screen, but because he's quiet, because he's internalizing his acting, he doesn't come across as aggressive. He just comes across as imposing. And imposing and menacing. Very good point there. The way he is filmed,
Basically, all the shots you see of him, it's the camera looking up at him to some extent.
Yeah.
They use his height to really great effect in this film. He is basically overshadowing everyone else in the film. And you make a good point about his performance being more modernistic. I think that is kind of what has made this film sort of sustain its impact throughout the years, is because it does have that kind of influential kind of aspect to it, where you see that a performance like Cregar's sort of the germination of future kind of like psychopaths and stuff in films. I've watched basically all the versions of The Lodger, so I'm kind of wondering if I got this mixed up or not. But the two people who take him in, the husband and wife, these two, if I recall correctly, are from an affluent family that has fallen on bad times where they no longer have money.
He's a merchant of some kind who has kind of lost his business and kind of an economic downturn kind of thing, and he's trying to rebuild. They obviously still, I mean, they're still paying a maid. They're still, but we're also talking about, this is in the Whitechapel district, which is right on the docks, and is very, I hate talking about British things because I know we have British listeners who are going to send me messages and tell me where I'm wrong on this. But my understanding is that it's, it's right by the docks. I mean, it is kind of like almost this like Southie Boston kind of place, and so the idea being like the kind of the wealthy people, kind of import exporters, I guess, in this kind of like very working class area that's filled with, those dirty immigrants, and that sort of thing. You definitely get a sense of where they are kind of economically precarious in some ways. That it's not quite as simple as like, well, they're wealthy or they've kind of fallen on hard times. It's sort of like they are kind of this kind of upper class, but kind of among the working class, which puts them in this kind of position. And the fact that the Lodger comes in, Slade comes in, and which is an assumed name. We never learn his real name, but Slade comes in and he's basically just allowing them to turn a blind eye by giving them the resources that they want.
Yeah, it's interesting because the other versions of this film, the two people that take him in are just sort of portrayed as working class instead of upper class. While the 2009 one, I guess that one as well kind of portrays the person who brings the Lodger in as working class. But this is the one film where it's two more sort of upper middle class people falling on hard times bringing the Lodger in, which adds to the economic kind of impact, I think, to a certain degree. Kind of makes it a little bit more realistic, I guess, in a way.
Well, the desire to like rub elbows with this guy who is a gentleman. They say it several times he is a gentleman. In fact, even the actress Kitty kind of responds to him as a, well, he's a gentleman. Of course, he can kind of do what he likes, and they miss the threat, or they understate the threat, because he is of this upper class. And I am almost interested in seeing the modern version of this, but I don't imagine that the modern version is going to do anything really interesting with these ideas in class,
I'll just say straight out, don't watch it. It's terrible.
Okay. I would love to see a good modern take on this that would actually examine some of these issues of, the kind of larger world in which these things take place, and was a little bit less focused on the kind of incidental characters that don't, ultimately matter that much to the overall storyline. I would love to see. Actually, it's not even a modern remake. It's almost like I wish that Laird Cregar had been directed by Fritz Lang in M or something. I almost not that John Brahm, I think, is the director here. Who I think does a brilliant job, but something more like M, which describes the kind of the panic around the murders that are occurring. But with this kind of Cregar performance at its center, I think would be a more fascinating look, rather than this kind of what feels like, at least today, by the numbers, at least on a kind of a plot level. That's just executed fairly well. With a great performance at the center, And
that was something I was drawing from as well as I was watching it. I was like, okay, there's a lot of stuff here that feels like M. Like there is that sort of I guess M really kind of established that sort of serial killer movie to a certain degree, like certain tropes in it, especially the panic in the public. But then I watched the Alfred Hitchcock version from 27. I saw a lot in that. And of course, this is a silent movie. There's different versions of it. There's a shorter version that doesn't have as many sort of title cards in it. Then I watched the long version, which is incredibly long for a silent movie. It's like an hour and a half or more that has all the title cards in it. Man, there's a lot of stuff in there where I was like, Fritz Lang must have seen this film and directly ripped a lot from it, because I think that is probably the first real serial killer film that's ever been made. Like, that film really does deal with, in its opening moments, a lot of the same stuff you see in M about the sort of panic in the public, where there's a direct scene where you see a woman who says she saw the killer running to a crowd of people, say, I saw the killer, and they disbelieve her, right? And then there's another scene where a guy is attacked because he's believed to be the killer.
Well, so I did not get the chance. I really wanted to see the 27 version. I just didn't make the time to do it this week. Mm-hmm. But it's on my list. Don't worry. I think one thing we didn't emphasize enough, and when we talked about M a few months ago now, is that even in 31, there was this kind of literature of serial killers and this kind of mm-hmm. knowledge of the serial killer, really Jack the Ripper, the real life occurrences inspired such a kind of a genre of literature in London or in England in the 19th century that some of the early, a lot of the earliest films at all were essentially killer films, serial killer films. One of the other things, again talking about M, and I promise I'm bringing this back to the logic here in a second. It's easy kind of looking backwards to look at something like M and think that it's kind of inventing a lot of these like cinematic techniques. It's not. It's drawing out of a rich tradition of this kind of German expressionist style, and doing it in a kind of populist way, but also in a heavily, kind of artistic way. The real triumph of M is not necessarily even the visuals, but the marriage of the visuals to this burgeoning technology of sound. By the time of The Lodger, you also have to keep in mind that Joseph Brahms, I think that's his name, Joseph Brahms, was also a director who fled the Nazis. That he was a well-known director of these kinds of films in the 30s. And he's definitely coming out of that same kind of school. In fact, I think that audiences in 1944 would have considered some of the sequences of these films to be kind of feel a little old-fashioned, to feel a little like, kind of a throwback to those 30s eras, as opposed to the other stuff that we've watched that's made in the 40s. You think about Kiss of Death is much more kind of what a standard noir film would have looked like at this time. Mm-hmm. The more abstract German expressionist stuff had kind of given way into a kind of a tough guy noirish feel, whereas here we're still kind of doing this slightly more kind of black and white, slightly harder edge, slightly more kind of aggressive shadows and that sort of thing, kind of visual presentation. Sorry, I just talked way too long about 30s expressionism, but hey, this is noir, right?
That was good. That was good. This film is definitely one of the versions that identifies the killer as Jack the Ripper and sets it in Whitechapel. The original novel does not do that. The original film does not do that. The Alfred Hitchcock one, they refer to the killer as the Avenger. It is definitely inspired directly from one of the many sort of stories that came from the Jack the Ripper sort of mythos. I'll point to a Jack Graham comment that he made a couple weeks ago. He said, "Did you know that The Lodger was partly inspired by after-dinner anecdotes about someone who had Jack the Ripper as a lodger, or so claimed that they thought Jack the Ripper was a lodger, in which the painter Walter Sickert used to love to tell. Sickert spun similar tales to his son, the painter Joseph Sickert, who later relayed them to the journalist Stephen Knight, who worked them up into a book about Jack the Ripper, The Final Solution, which named Sir William Gull the first popularized Masonic conspiracy theory of the Masons basically covering up Jack the Ripper as the killer, as being some sort of upper crust person, like a doctor or something along those lines." It was basis for the movie Murder by Decree, which, of course, is probably, I think, the first movie that sort of speculates that Jack the Ripper was involved with the Masons to some degree. And then, in that movie, he's hunted by Sherlock Holmes, which led to Alan Moore's comic From Hell, which also goes for sort of the same premise of Masonic connection to the killer. And yeah, that's kind of an interesting part of this sort of Jack the Ripper mythology. Like, there's been this whole sort of fictional exploration of the killer because he was never caught, so he's always been stuck in the public conscience to some degree. I think there is definitely this sort of overwhelming desire to, if you can't do it in real life, at least fictionally, come to some conclusion and some sort of cap on the killer. So a lot of books and stuff like that really do deal with trying to catch the killer and coming to some solution. I think it's interesting that you take a fictional detective like Sherlock Holmes, and of course Sherlock Holmes would be the guy, if he actually existed, to catch the killer. And so you definitely see a lot of Sherlock Holmes fiction connected with Jack the Ripper. Like,
we have this kind of idea that, like Sherlock Holmes is, all right, I'm going to reach a little bit here, but Sherlock Holmes is kind of like Superman. Mm-hmm. Superman comes out of the experience of kind of late 30s American immigrant Jewish kids who wanted a hero who could beat up the terrible people they knew in their real lives. I mean, in the early comics, Superman is literally as often as he's beating up kind of like space aliens or supervillains, he's beating up like terrible tenant owners and that sort of thing, and slumlords and kind of
his early stuff, he's beating up gangsters basically,
right? Like gangsters and like people. I mean, he's almost objectively fighting for like this kind of FDR era, kind of socialist vision in a way. Connecting that back to to Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes is almost our childlike desire for a detective who can put all the pieces together. We have this feeling that all the pieces are there if we only had a mind that was complex enough and smart enough to put it together for us and solve this mystery and give us this unambiguous solution to who this horrible killer was. The truth is that that's not really how crimes are done. But I mean, I think that's why the Sherlock Holmes almost a monomyth. It's almost, it's not even a myth. It's a myth about myths almost that we see so many. I mean, Daryl Zero draws out of that same kind of idea. Is like there's this guy who's just that bright. Who can solve this for us, who can make this fit together, and the way that kind of culture interacts with those that kind of desire for this kind of heroic, brilliant person tinges on the kind of the great man of history problem, and it tinges on so much of the kind of, if we only had this bright person who could just make the country work right and could just solve all our problems, as opposed to us kind of having to solve all our problems piecemeal for ourselves. Sorry, I kind of got big picture on that, but I think the film definitely kind of or the Ripper mythos, the kind of the fear of the Ripper is that it is nebulous and unknown, and we don't know who it was, and so we get to just kind of make up details. And the stories about the Ripper are in a lot of ways more interesting than who the identity of this actual killer really was. We don't even know how many people the Ripper actually killed, because there might have been several people doing murders and that sort of thing. I've looked a little bit into the Ripper stuff, and it doesn't draw me in enough to force me to kind of know all the details by heart. But it's very much like the JFK assassination in that way, to where it's I am of the opinion that Lee Harvey Oswald killed JFK alone, but the kind of the hypotheses surrounding that are almost more interesting than like Oswald himself. So
Yeah, and the Ripper killings become even more mythological because there's really no hard forensic science at that point. They feel like there's like 5 official Ripper murders that they can pin on him. Yep. And then after that, and it even goes back to the episode we did on the Town of Dreaded Sundown with the Phantom Killer there.
I was thinking a lot of that film when I was rewatching The Lodger.
It's a lot of the same. It's a lot of the same thing. It becomes absorbed by the public conscience, and everyone has their own theories, and it becomes a myth, and it becomes larger than life. And our fictional heroes are the things that the public conscious sort of develops to answer these questions that can never actually be answered, and just make us feel safe and secure that we actually do have an answer for the monsters out there that do horrible things. But yeah.
Can I say this conversation we just had is way more interesting than everything but Laird Cregar in the Lodger?
Probably, yeah.
I really wish this was more in the film. We're completely on a sideline at this point, but
I'll go through a couple things here. Laird Cregar's screen presence and performance basically here created such a sensation that 20th Century Fox, they had planned to do a whole series of films with him, basically revolving around this. The film we're going to get into, Hangover Square, was the first of these, also directed by John Brom. And also screenwritten by Barry Lyndon, and also co-starring George Sanders, who did the detective part in this film. But plans were cut short because, unfortunately, Cregar is one of those victims of Hollywood at the time where he died of a fatal heart attack right before Hangover Square was released. He was like we were saying here, he was starting to lose weight. Apparently, using methamphetamines to lose weight, and basically gave him a fatal heart attack, which is really goddamn sad because he's a fucking talented guy. I kind of wish there was more movies to see him in. Really,
what you can say is to any young teen that you think might be abusing methamphetamines, just say, don't be like Laird Cregar.
Yeah,
and they'll get that reference immediately.
Well, be like Laird Cregar, just don't do the
methamphetamine.
Yeah, because Laird Cregar is fucking brilliant.
So there's actually since you bring it up, I'm gonna just the actress Merle Oberon, who is the female lead of this film. Actually was apparently one of the big people who was encouraging Cregar to lose weight. Like, if you lose weight, you could be a leading man. And apparently she kind of downplays her own influence. Kind of later in her life, she definitely was, oh, no, that experience, I barely remember being on that film, that sort of thing. But apparently, basically, she was kind of pressuring him, like telling him you could be a big star, and kind of giving him this belief in his own abilities to kind of become a leading man if you just lost a bunch of weight. And I think that led directly to his eventual death.
I buy that to the extent that I read a lot of sort of anecdotes while I was researching this of Cregar was basically desperate to get like leading man roles and stuff like that. And he definitely had hurdles to jump just with his homosexuality, but the image problem as well. I can definitely see that at the time. Yeah. Although when you think about it, he fits perfectly as a sort of noir leading man kind of hero. Because he's got the same sort of build as like a Victor Mature or something like that, where that big raw boned guy, he's a little soft around the middle part, but big. I mean, Laird Cregar was a big guy either way. Like, even if he was thin, he would be a big guy.
Well, after Cregar died, a couple of years later, Raymond Burr kind of comes on the screen. Kind of comes on the scene, excuse me. And basically, there was a rumor going around that Raymond Burr was actually Cregar's brother or something like that. And Raymond Burr did not discourage those rumors because it got him roles that Cregar would have otherwise gotten. So Raymond Burr in some ways owes to some degree his career to the fact that Cregar wasn't around anymore. And kind of starts to fill that role. There's a really nice piece at a blog called She Blogged by Night that I'm going to share to our Facebook page after we record this episode. That was instrumental in making me rewatch The Lodger, and kind of because it really the author she gets a lot more out of the film than I did, and I see many of her points, even though I appreciate the film less than she does. I think it's this piece is really worthwhile, and so I'll link to it. She talks. One thing, the only other thing I do want to talk about The Lodger is that it the sexual elements of the film, the fact that she is an actress, the fact that an actress is almost euphemistic. I mean, she's doing this basically can dancing, and in fact, the old woman, the middle-aged woman, even kind of says, like, she gets on the stage and she's almost doing can dancing. There is this sense of, like, this kind of lascivious treatment of this actress. I mean, today we would see her much more like almost like a Vegas showgirl or something. Would be kind of a more kind of culturally similar thing. And there are two extended sequences in The Lodger, which are dance sequences in which there are kind of shot and edited in a way that is overtly sexualized. I mean, there's and in the second, it's kind of intercut with Cregar, kind of his increasing simultaneous terror and rage at the way she makes him feel, and that's that connection to this kind of either a fear of the character, not the actor. Sorry, a fear of like the character's possible kind of impending homosexuality, or just brother might not be a brother. It's kind of where I kept kind of coming back to, like,
look how beautiful my brother was.
Look at his brow. Look at how brilliant he was. And this is not the way a man describes a biological brother. I mean, this is. I think there's a gay reading of this film that is simultaneously really interesting, but also such that becomes the cliche of the gay killer is kind of what that's about then. But such an early example, it's very well executed if that's kind of what was intended. But it's and the She Blood by Night piece goes into that a little bit more detail. So I'll just share that to the Facebook page and let people read it.
Awesome, and we'll probably link it in the show notes as well. So I'll just mention the original novel ends ambiguously. With the reader never sure if the lodger was actually the killer. The Alfred Hitchcock film, of course, changes the ending, and I still recommend you watch it because I'm not really giving too much away. It's still actually a phenomenal film. It's probably, Hitchcock actually said it was his first like really good film that he made. There's also some other adaptations that have actually changed the ending as well. Where the lodger is proven to be the killer, and that would be like the Jack Palance version from '53 called Man in the Attic, where and in that one it's kind of hard not to instantly know that Jack Palance is the killer. There's no way he could not be the killer just because Jack Palance is such a skull-faced, grinning villain. It's actually not a bad movie. It's just like there's no suspense at all to that one, and it's definitely inferior compared to this version of the lodger. The 32 version is also, it's all right, but it's very sort of typical. This version is the version of the lodger, even though Alfred Hitchcock's is really great. This is the definite version for me. I think it's really well done. It's got more flair and artistic visuals and stuff to it than I've seen in any other one. Although the Alfred Hitchcock one, there is some good stuff. Like there's you see some hints of his stuff to come. There's this really good close-up of the first victim that the film opens on, where she sees the lodger and it's from the lodger's point of view, where he comes in to kill her, and it's really well done. I don't think there's probably any other silent movie that's really done what that film did back in the day, so it stands out. George Sanders, by the way, who was the detective in the film. During World War II, he did a series of films where he played two different characters, the Falcon and the Saint. This guy went on to have a couple of novels ghost-written under his name, cashing in on the fame of those film series. They were actually both written by female authors, by the way. The ghost-written novels.
Well, women having careers ghostwriting for men, that's not at all a new thing. So,
and I bring this up because one of them was Leigh Brackett.
Oh, well, that's again wrapping right back around to to our continual our podcast girlfriend. Can we call Leigh Brackett our podcast wife or something?
Hell yeah, sure, why not? I'd marry Leigh Brackett. She was fucking brilliant. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to play a couple of little promos from two different podcasts, the Badass Boobs and Body Counts and the Hail Ming Power Hour, and then we'll come right back for Hangover Square.
You've become a corporate whore? Is that what's happening now? Like you're just whoring out other podcasts? Like,
well, no, because I'm not getting any money out of this.
Okay.
If Mike Murphy from Badass Boobs and Body Counts was paying me in money or perhaps pictures of tits, he could still do that, by the way. Send me tits, Mike. But no, I'm not getting paid by anything. The Hail Ming Power Hour, Ming the Merciless is not going to pay me shit. He's just going to destroy my planet. So
you haven't turned this into a capitalist enterprise, is what you're saying?
Well, I mean, look at your paycheck. What does that tell you?
Oh, well, that's true. I just thought you were exploiting me, like the capitalist you have.
I am exploiting you, but
you're exploiting my labor.
Yeah, I am exploiting you, but I'm not. But I'm not paying you anything. I'm exploiting you for your insight and knowledge on film, but I'm not paying you shit.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, but we'll be right back after these messages, kids.
Movies need only 3 things: badasses.
You tell me who you want done, and I'll do the hell out of it.
A chick with drive who don't take no jive.
Boobs.
Do you know that the female breast, known to be the source of life since Eve, can be deadly weapons?
And body counts.
Body count. The mathematics of murder and menace.
The BB and BC podcast is your source for exploitation film discussion of B-movies. You can find the show on iTunes and Stitcher Radio by searching for BB and BC podcast. You can also listen to each episode directly from the show's website located at badassesboobsandbodycounts.com.
Let's go to work.
Clytus, I'm bored. What plaything can you offer me today?
An obscure body in the SK system, Your Majesty. The inhabitants refer to it as the planet Earth.
How peaceful it looks.
Most effective, Your Majesty. Will you destroy this Earth?
Destroy it utterly.
Send Rick and Danny in Wool Rocket Ajax.
So, just destroy it?
That's what Ming said. Don't you ever listen?
Well, there's no arguing with Ming.
Hail Ming. Wait! You see those transmissions on the Visua screen?
Crow? Nightmare on Elm Street?
Chud 2? Black Belt Jones?
Nightbreed?
What's a critter?
Oh, I've seen those things.
Flash? I guess we could wait a while before the destruction.
Yeah, and watch the movies.
And talk about them.
The Hail Ming Power Hour. Disobedience to Ming. For now.
You can find us at Legion Podcast.
You can find us on Facebook.
iTunes.
We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram.
At You know what? Just Google it for yourself.
Just Google it, you bastages.
Hail Ming.
Breaking 2? Electric Boogaloo?
Samurai Cop?
Army of Darkness?
Flashdance?
We might destroy the planet if it's Flashdance.
And all right, we can start now with Hangover Square from 1945, although I think it was probably filmed in 44, but it didn't get released.
It was because Cregar died in 44, so we can be pretty sure it was not filmed in 45.
Yeah.
The police tell strange tales about this man, who at one moment is a tender lover, and in the next moment the fiendish slave of his own desire to kill.
And this has been going on all the time, I suppose.
Now, look here, my dear Bones.
And
It's going to be all right in a day or two.
but at the piano, she said,
My dear fellow,
she
don't get
kissed me.
upset.
She whispered to me. She promised you could have me, she said.
Never has such a gripping story been so realistically enacted. Breathtaking indeed, are the performances of Laird, Cregar, Linda Darnell, George Sanders, Glenn Langan, Fay Marlowe, and others.
Why don't you go away and leave me alone?
Well, George, you can't let me down now. Please.
This goes on and on. These songs mean nothing to me. What do I get out of them?
You could get me.
Directed by John Brown, written by Barry Lyndon and based on a novel as well, by Marion. No, did I get that right? It is based on a novel, but I didn't write down who wrote it.
I think Harrison is his last name.
Is it
Patrick Hamilton? Pardon me,
Patrick Hamilton. Okay, there we go. Yeah, written by Barry Lyndon, Marion Spritzer, and Patrick Hamilton is the novel that's based on. Again, starring Laird Cregar as George Harvey Bone, Linda Darnell, the lovely Linda Darnell, as Netta Longden, George Sanders again as Dr. Alan Middleton this time around, Glenn Langan as Eddie Carstairs, Fay Marlowe as Barbara Chapman, and Alan Napier, who people might remember as Alfred from the 1966 Batman, as Sir Henry Chapman. So there you go, that's your cast, and we'll go right to the synopsis there, Daniel.
George Harvey Bone, Laird Cregar, is a Victorian-era composer dedicated to his work of composing a concerto for Sir Henry Chapman, Alan Napier, but also given to bouts of memory loss that leave him fearful that he may be committing terrible acts during the blackout periods. He is right to fear so, because in one of the opening shots of the film, we see him brutally murdering an elderly antiques dealer and burning his shop. His concerns are belittled by psychiatrist Dr. Alan Middleton, George Sanders, despite being shared by Bone's neighbor Barbara Chapman, Fay Marlowe, who is also the daughter of the man funding the concerto. The psychiatrist, learning that Bone's black little moods are caused by any loud dissonant note, simply urges the composer to take some time off from his work and relax. Attempting to take this advice, Bone attends the local music hall where he discovers the sultry popular singer Netta Longden, Linda Darnell, and is immediately smitten by her. Upon her urging, he writes a few bars of music to go with the tune Netta is working on, and when she finds success with his music, she, encouraged by her business/romantic partner Mickey, Michael Dine, begins to manipulate Bone into giving her more music, implying that she returns his affections and his desires for a more intimate relationship despite finding him a crushing bore. The relationship between Longden and Bone continues, financially lucrative for her and romantic/physical for him, until one night she spies the famous Eddie Carstairs and hatches a plan to ditch her dull date and sing for him so as to convince him to engage in a business partnership with her. Bone discovers her trick, though, confronts her, and is rebuffed for his romantic ineptitude. That night, after having his ear split by some falling pipes, Bone strangles the lovely Barbara, who had done nothing wrong, with a so-called thuggy cord while in a fugue state. He must have done it from behind, though, for Barbara does not realize who her assailant was, and expresses concern for what the relationship with Longden is doing to Bone's life and career. Bone agrees and decides to cut off contact with Longden. This does not last for long, however, and she soon entices him back into her arms and has him writing more music for her with the barely even implicit promise of sexual favors. Alas, when he later attempts to propose marriage to the lovely but duplicitous Langdon, he discovers her with her true beau Mickey and, enraged, attempts to strangle the other man. He flees the scene despondent, but when his cat, obtained from Longden, by the way, knocks over a musical instrument, he goes into another fugue state and returns to Langdon's address to murder her. The film's last half hour consists basically of two virtuoso sequences. In the first, Bone carries Longden's now lifeless body wrapped in a sheet through the streets of London. Having had the blind luck to murder his wannabe lover on Guy Fawkes Day, he is inconspicuous in crowds of others burning effigies in a giant bonfire and is able to destroy the body in perfect safety. In the other, the increasingly mad Bone has finally completed the brilliant concerto he has spent the entire film composing, but the music itself seems to draw out his memories of his terrible crimes, and in the midst of the performance he is confronted first by the psychiatrist, then the police. Having thrown a flame towards the police while in flight, Bone first attempts to listen to his beautiful music just once before he is taken, but as the entire concert hall begins to become engulfed in flame, Bone sits himself before the piano to perform the piece itself as the building burns around him. One gets the sense, though, that in his art, Bone has finally found the contentment that has eluded him throughout the rest of the film.
Nice.
I'm pretty sure I said Langdon and Longden interchangeably there. The character's name is Longden, Netta Longden, so yeah. I apologize.
Again, since both these films are fresh in your mind, I'll get you to start off your initial thoughts on this one.
I discovered this through Linda Darnell. I had seen her in a couple other films, and this was kind of highly regarded on her Wikipedia page as a film worth seeing.
Well, you mentioned her earlier in another episode of this podcast.
I did.
Didn't you? Yeah.
I had originally watched "It Happens Tomorrow," which is kind of a cheesy romantic thing from 1944. And she is just mesmerizing in that. Like, she is way better than the rest of the film. She has this incredibly again modernistic kind of style of acting. She is just a sassy little spitfire and everything. And then I saw another film she made, and I'm blanking on the title right now. I could look it up, but I'm not going to. But I did see her in a noir film. She did quite a few kind of noirish things. And I had seen her in that and mentioned it earlier as what we've been watching in one of those segments. And I will say that my wife Shayna, upon seeing her for the first time, immediately was like, well, of course you're into her. Like, she's the one who gives no fucks. She's the one, the aggressive one. She's the of course you're into that. That's the one you're into, of course. Like, because she knows how to say no. It's great. Yeah, I discovered this through Linda Darnell. I kind of watched it. I wasn't really. I was like, oh, it's kind of a serial killer movie. It's kind of this kind of thing. But it's got this girl Linda Darnell, this woman Linda Darnell, who I'm really like interested in seeing more of her work. Who I've just kind of like fallen for as my kind of movie girlfriend from the 40s. She's kind of my Soledad Miranda, but from the mid 40s. Yeah. And really enjoyed the film. Like even aside from Darnell, but I did discover the film through her, and I kind of at first was kind of viewing the film through that lens, and then found Laird Cregar so fascinating that I started looking at his other stuff, and that led me to The Lodger. So I kind of found these backwards. Yeah. Originally, I was just going to talk about Hangover Square as a I kind of recommended it to you. Like, you should see this, particularly for the last kind of 20 minutes or so, which are absolutely astonishing for 1944 or 1945. I think I mentioned it as like a sequence David Fincher would be proud to direct. Quite honestly, but the rest of the film really holds up as well. I mean, this is one of the issues, and I'll get into this a little bit more here in a minute. But one of the issues is that people kind of connected these two films at the time. I think a lot of people see Hangover Square as kind of the pale retread of The Lodger. It's kind of like, oh, they were just trying to remake The Lodger again. And on a superficial level, I mean, it's like, well, kind of they're both about kind of killers who. Serial killers who kill a young woman halfway through, et cetera, et cetera. But the psychology and the themes and everything are completely different. They're very different films, and Cregar is giving two very different performances. So I'm not sure. I mean, I think that's a superficial reading of the film, which is bolstered by the fact that the original novel was not very much like The Lodger, and it kind of got shifted over into being much more like The Lodger by Daryl Zanuck, who basically was trying to save money on some sets and like, well, make it more like The Lodger. That was successful for us. We can reuse some of the sets, and it'll be popular the same way The Lodger was.
Yeah, like the Lodger, the sort of rewrites on this film, the change from the novel sets it back in Victorian times, where the actual novel for this film that was based upon is actually in World War II, is where it's set. It's set during that period.
It's set basically contemporaneously with the production of the film, or with the writing of the novel. It was kind of a recent novel at the time, and it's much more focused on this kind of relationship between Netta and Mickey and Bone. So it's much more kind of about that relationship. I don't even think there's a serial killer aspect in the novel. Reading the plot synopsis, I was and it's explicitly about alcoholism as well. So I was definitely on that level. I was like, well, this sounds like, again, kind of a more interesting version. Even then, I liked the film a lot, but I was kind of like, I need to read this novel. But I only discovered this afternoon as I was doing research, so I didn't get a chance to read the novel. But it's on my list to read, definitely.
The Harvey Bone character in the novel apparently is just a straight up sad drunk. He's not a virtuoso pianist with a lot of talent. He's not someone anyone would want to clap onto. Apparently, the Linda Darnell character in the novel hangs out with him because he has money. I guess so. That's one of the main differences. But Actually, I like the changes in this film compared to the novel. I think it works well. They were, of course, trying to capitalize on the Lodger's success. They were definitely trying to write it more towards that direction, but I think there's a lot of sort of flourishes in the way things are done in this film that really set it apart from the Lodger and make it on its own a really excellent fucking film that I kind of think is highly influential for films from basically 20 years afterwards from this. There's definitely a lot about basically the psychology of a killer. I think one of the big things I take from this, I'm watching this, and I think Roger Corman must have saw this film. Because I look at all the Poe films that Corman did in the 60s with Vincent Price. Almost all of those films sort of follow the same pattern that the plot of this film sort of follows, where you have the slow build-up, you get the menace, the dread, the confusion, some plot twists sort of developing throughout the whole film, and then you get this just out of left field crazy fucking ending where everything shit hits the fan and everything goes nuts. I did no further research to confirm this, so I might just be talking out my ass, but I think Roger Corman might have saw this film and might have had that in mind.
Well, particularly if you bring up the Vincent Price connection, because there were radio versions of both The Lodger and Hangover Square that were done with Vincent Price in the Laird Cregar role. So that would not at all surprise me, and that was in the early 50s, so it would have been before Corman was... I haven't seen those films, but...
And when I think about it, Vincent Price really does kind of... Like, he's been known for playing a sort of character that kind of fits the Laird Cregar mode for characters. Like, there was always sort of an ambiguous kind of sensitivity to a lot of Vincent Price's characters. I think mostly sort of in the inflection on how he spoke. There was always this sort of more sensitive psychological bent to the characters that he played. And you can definitely see that from Laird Cregar, where you can see and I'm pretty sure Laird Cregar and Vincent Price were friends. I think I read that somewhere where they were.
I mean, if they were both, came out of that same kind of school and that same kind of subculture.
I'm pretty sure they were in a movie together almost. I don't know if I read that correctly or not. Don't quote me on that shit. But I mean, there's just too many connections there where I just chalk it up to a fucking coincidence at this point. But
yeah, I think one thing I've learned from watching both of these films is that Cregar was someone that really was a special talent and really he had a career in just a few years. He made dozens of films, but I think he would have gone on to become much more. He would be better remembered had he not died so young. I mean, I think he was only
31 or something.
31 when he died. Which I mean is astonishing that he's 31 years old here, and
yeah, because he looks a lot older. Like, it's kind of weird when you look at actors back in the day, where a 31-year-old would look like he was like 45 or something like that.
Well, that's the you don't have like modern advances in healthcare. Definitely, It definitely affects that. But I mean, for me, it's not even so much like, well, he doesn't look 31 in the sense that he looks old, as much as look at how great he was, and he's only 31.
Maturity,
He has such a command of his craft. I wouldn't say that this is a perfect film at all. I think actually the elements that are the kind of the faux psychology of the the ringing, the dissonant tone is what kind of drives him mad and that sort of thing. Plays more as a kind of a metaphor for kind of alcoholic stumbling. I mean, when I first presented this film to you, I kind of said, it's called Hangover Square, and you're like, well, I got to see something called Hangover Square, just as like that sounds interesting, and I'm like, well, it's not about that at all, but the novel kind of is, and it's very easy to kind of read this as a metaphor for kind of I do terrible things when I'm drunk sort of thing. I mean, it's very easy to kind of imagine it as a sort of commentary on what alcoholism really does to people's lives and what it drives people to do, sort of thing. And so it is this kind of I mean, you can view it that way if you choose to. I don't think that's necessarily required by the film. I'll tell you what I find really fascinating about this is exactly what was lacking in the Lodger is all the people around Cregar, and that is particularly Linda Darnell, who I think is just magnetic in this, and completely believable as this character. She's definitely doing this overtly kind of film fatale kind of role.
Yeah.
But you really get a very clear sense of who all these people are and what their relationships are to one another, and what they mean to each other. That, Linda Darnell's character Annetta is not just a she's not just like conniving bitch. She's in love with the Mickey guy. She's kind of like, that's the real relationship in her life, and she's kind of like, yeah, I'll manipulate this guy. I mean, I'll kind of promise him things that aren't real, but I'm doing it because I love this other guy and because I'm building my career. I don't even necessarily. I mean, she certainly doesn't deserve to be killed for what she's done.
No.
But I don't even necessarily. I mean, she's an actress, or she's a singer who's trying to make a name for herself, and if she can kind of manipulate this guy, and like, it's not a good thing to do, but I'm kind of like, yeah, I kind of understand. She's not a terrible person. I don't see her as like this awful human being.
You can understand the motivation especially given the time period that it's presented in, where a female actress, the singer actress, trying to advance her career. That's definitely an understandable avenue that some might take at that point.
And just saying, well, there's this really talented, literally composer who does exist. I mean, we can't ignore the class issues here, who definitely exists in this kind of upper class. He's doing these like fancy concertos. I just need a few bars of music to sell my songs and to be able to kind of make a career as a singer. Why not kind of grift this guy a little bit, and like he will never notice the loss that, it's only because this guy becomes fixated on her that it becomes an issue. And if he had, I mean, she is definitely manipulating him. I don't want to pretend like that's not happening. But the scale of her sin is not in any sense like, commensurate with the way she ends up being.
Not worth being strangled to death for, definitely.
No.
And
with a thuggy cord, I think we're going to have to talk about the fucking thuggy cord at some point.
Yeah. And I'll just say Darnell's incredibly sexy in this film. You talk about the can stuff that the actress is doing in The Lodger. Here, it's even more sexualized. Here, you get that opening shot with her legs just being exposed or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Really good, really good.
I believe Wikipedia described this film, and this is what made me seek it out as the film where Linda Darnell shows her full legs for the first time.
Yeah.
Well, that's something I need to seek out. So I apologize if I had a slightly less than perfectly austere reason for wanting to appreciate this film. Is like Linda Darnell's legs. She's brilliant, and I would like to see what she looked like.
No, she's really good. Oh yeah, I was going to mention that unfortunately, when you look at this film, you see all the three leads in this film all met tragic ends. We already talked about Laird Cregar. Linda Darnell, of course, unfortunately also met a tragic end.
She got in a house fire.
An ironic end, apparently, because she was scared of fire, from what I've read. Do
you know what her most famous role is, or the thing that most people would like connect to?
No.
She was in 0 Hour from 1957, which is essentially the film that got remade as a comedy by the Zucker brothers as Airplane.
Oh, really?
If you watch 0 Hour, I mean, this is literally Airplane without the jokes. They literally just lifted the script and turned it into a comedy. Just added in the slapsticky humor. I watched enough of it to get like that's exactly what they did, but it's almost impossible to watch now. But that was her in 57, so 13 years later, and she had she had aged. I mean, she was definitely not the kind of dynamic presence that she was in the early 40s.
She had struggled with alcoholism and put on weight, apparently, so that had affected her career, unfortunately. George Sanders, also a sad case. His career, of course, went on for quite a while afterwards, but apparently he had gotten to the point in the 60s where he was starting to experience the onset of dementia and committed suicide. So there's definitely a lot of sadness actually connected between these two films.
Way to bring this podcast episode about two serial killers down, Lee.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but and also I should mention, getting on maybe to a more positive note, more influences this film might have had. I kind of think this film might have had a lot of influence on the Italian giallo genre after this, because the whole sound setting off the killer thing just kind of screams as one of those plot points of there was always these really obtuse, weird sort of plot points that set off killers in giallo films. And then just looking at the opening kill, the point of view of the killer coming after the shopkeeper wasn't the first time it was done, of course, because we spoke of The Lodger. We spoke of Alfred Hitchcock doing that in his version of The Lodger for the opening kill, but very brutally done almost in this film. Like very.
One of the points that that opening kill, that opening shot. I mean, it's not quite the opening shot, but it's basically the opening shot of the film. One of the most brilliant shots in the film, in a film that's full of brilliant, direction. Not just because it does feel startlingly modern, but it is very much drawn out of, and this is kind of where I connected back. It is very much drawn out of that 30s expressionism stuff. It's just done through this kind of like POV, kind of handheldy kind of thing. This also differentiates, one of the big reasons it differentiates from The Lodger is that The Lodger kind of plays with this idea of like, is this guy the killer or not?
Yeah.
Whereas in this film, there's no question, and you know who the killer is in the like third shot of the film. It's like, oh, and look, there's our hero Laird Cregar, who is like literally burning this guy alive.
And that's another thing. Fire surrounds this guy every time he goes into his murderous states. I mean, it starts off, there's fire at the kill in the shop. Fire surrounding him when he's he has these interactions with that guy in the street there who's like what the fuck is he even? Is he like a rat catcher or something like that?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. I mean, there's so much intricacy here, and I think that again, where The Lodger feels a little, and I hate kind of talking about. I mean, The Lodger is about its tone and about its mood and is about kind of setting a scene, whereas Hangover Square is about the people and about these kind of small characters, and it is about the mood and it is about like the cinematography, but it's fundamentally about the relationship between these. Really, these three people, but really, particularly the Darnell and the Linda Darnell and Laird Cregar relationship is core to this film. And you spend, rewatching it today, because I actually have seen this film 3 times now, because I watched it originally, then I watched it before we were going to record last week, and then I watched it today, and I had forgotten just how much screen time this relationship takes. I mean, she's not dead until like almost an hour into the film, and the film's only an hour and like 27 minutes long or something like that. So you're basically talking about the from about 15 minutes in till about so like 45 minutes of this film is basically just the relationship between these two characters.
Well, it really builds to her death, and that's kind of the real major set piece of the film too, is that her death and the subsequent disposal of the body. Which again,
I really want Paul to see this film just to. I would love to hear what he has to say about that sequence, because I think it's haunting. I think it's really impressively done, particularly at this time period to have like this. This is a very morbid, a very macabre, kind of idea of.
This is, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is Hitchcock. Before Hitchcock was known for being Hitchcock, really. I mean, and I'll just set this up for the people. I mean, spoilers, fuck you if you haven't watched this film yet. He's going to the Guy Fawkes celebration where the idea is you have this bonfire and you take all these effigies of Guy Fawkes and throw them into the fire and burn them. So you have all these Guy Fawkes masks on these effigies. He decides to put a mask on the body of Linda Darnell's character, and try to pass it off as an effigy and throw it on the bonfire. And he's the last guy to do it, basically. He struggles carrying her body up to the top of the bonfire, which is probably about 15, 20 feet fucking tall. And you get this little shot of the mask starting to slip off. And you almost think, okay, this is going to undo him. People are going to see this shit, and it's going to catch him. But no, and it doesn't happen. He gets away with it. He throws her body on the fire, and he barely escapes the fucking bonfire starting and catching him on fire. But I was just watching. I was like, that is a total Hitchcock kind of shot, like that. Yeah.
I mean, her face being exposed, and you see kind of the bottom of her, like her lips, and the bottom of her chin. You see her chin and her lips, and he throws the body on, and you get the shot of his face as he's doing that. You kind of see not just the the kind of performative like grief or whatever, but you see the sense of just the physical weight of having carried her body that far, and needing to get rid of this thing, and and this is where I feel like the kind of the method, the kind of the plot device of the sound and of the like he's in this fugue state actually cheapens it for me. I mean, I think it would be more effective if this was something he was kind of actively choosing to do, like if he had realized he was doing these things and then realized he needed to get rid of the body and then had chosen to do this. It's that sort of thing that it's kind of hard not to talk about Hitchcock a little bit, but Psycho, the Norman Bates character, Anthony Perkins, kind of borrows from that same thing. Like he knows what he's doing when he's getting rid of Janet Leigh's body in Psycho, and that kind of psychological realism makes it more compelling. And I almost wish, I do wish actually that this had been kind of rewritten almost to just get rid of that. The kind of piercing noise thing entirely, and had been written as
so
this guy commits the crime and then doesn't know what to do from there.
So would you rather have him been like Norman Bates, where he has the sort of split personality, where the dominant mother personality comes to the forefront and directs him to do these things, or would you have just been he's just straight up a killer who knows what he's doing all along?
I think I would rather it have been the latter. For me, I almost would rather just get rid of the kind of blind rage aspect entirely, or the kind of the killing at the beginning, as compelling as that shot is. I almost wish it had been, I get stressed. I kind of feel like I need some kind of thing, and instead of like prescribing medicine or whatever, the doctor just says, go to the music hall, chill out, get some relaxation. He meets this girl. He builds a relationship with this woman in his mind, and then finds out that she's, marrying somebody else, and then, kind of kills her in a rage, and then has to figure out what to do with the body. Like to remove that element entirely and just turn it into a story about the psychology of these characters together. Because for me, at least, the kind of, at least just in terms of shoe leather, he's walking back and forth between lots of different apartments and lots of different houses, and there's a lot of like kind of screen time that's just taken up in him greeting people along the street and that sort of thing. And I feel like you could tell a compelling version of this that dispenses with that kind of fundamental kind of the kind of mental break stuff altogether. But then you lose the hangover metaphor, so you kind of depend on how you want to treat it. But that's kind of I like the Darnell and Cregar relationship so much, and I love that dynamic between those characters that I in kind of classic noir style. I wish the horror elements were downplayed a little bit more, and it was pushed more towards noir, but the funeral pyre stuff is just amazing. Even just watching the last 20 minutes aside from the rest of the film, and you would think this is a brilliant film without even knowing anything at all about the relationship and these characters and all the other stuff that's going on. So sorry, I rewrote the film. I apologize.
Yeah, that last sequence is startling. Like I didn't expect it to happen, and I was just like, oh my god, this is Roger Corman's Pose films. They end the exact same way, where everything just goes batshit, and Cregar just sells it so well. He's just there playing his piece on the piano, and you can see he's finally at peace. Like he finally gets to the point where he always wanted to be throughout the entire film, and it just happens to be. The moment where the flames are going to creep him and burn him to death, But
what I find is interesting about that final sequence is it takes its time. These are not films. These are not long films. This is 87 minutes long. I think The Lodger is similar, 85 minutes, 86 minutes, something like that. What I find fascinating is that the director takes his time to really give us some kind of smooth crane shots. There's some real, like, you watch this guy play the piano for a while. Like, this isn't like, a few shots and then we kind of move on to this. Concerto is something that he's been building his whole life towards to some degree. It's something we've been building the whole film towards. And it's a beautiful piece of music. And if Lee does not include this piece of music as our going out,
it's going to be. And by the way, all the music here was done by Bernard Herrmann in one of his earlier soundtrack things, and Lionel Newman. And I'm just going to warn people right now listening. I'm going to include the whole sort of 10-minute piece at the end. So
there's no. I was watching it, like, literally right before we started recording. I was watching the last 10 minutes of this film and thinking, there's no way not to just include the whole thing. Like Lee should just bite the bullet and say, okay, there's a 10-minute sequence at the end, and you should watch the film now. Just stop listening to me now and watch the film, and then listen to the rest of this, and then listen to that music again, because it's so amazing. It's such a, I mean, I kind of have those first few notes in my head, just talking about it. A young Stephen Sondheim saw this film. He was young, and actually saw this film twice. And just to memorize those first few notes, like how they're played on the piano, and he could play it. Like that was one of his early influences, was this film, actually.
Nice.
I found that in my kind of little bit of research I did. The direction is helped by the fact that Laird Cregar, although he is not actually, the soundtrack is overdubbed, but he could actually play the piano, so he could actually play the music. So there was this kind of you didn't have to cut away. You could kind of do these shots where he's clearly playing the piece, and not have to use cutaways. You could just kind of watch his performance and him play the piano at the same time, and kind of get that sense. I think that something that is prominent in the way that people kind of talk about this film, those that do, I think this is one film that really is like underappreciated, at least from kind of what I found online. But I think one thing that's really nice to see is that the score is so well integrated into the film in general, but particularly in that last sequence is just virtuoso. And I think it's anybody that has a love of cinema at all should see this film just for the last 15 minutes or so.
I totally agree. I don't know if I have anything else I need to say about this one, honestly. I think we covered. I will mention Cameron Sullivan made a comment. He was kind of wondering if we could say if this film was heavily inspired by other films of the respective decade, and I kind of wonder if really that's kind of the opposite, where these films kind of maybe inspired other films to a certain degree. Like I think we mentioned that these films were definitely inspired by like Fritz Lang, and then Fritz Lang was inspired by Alfred Hitchcock, probably. As far as the genre conventions go for these kind of films, but
well, you've got to think they all come out of this again, the kind of German expressionist stuff, which kind of comes out of not just we kind of think of that as being 30s, but that came out of the kind of art films of the 20s. Really, this all comes out of even like going back to like D.W. Griffith. There's stuff in like Intolerance that's just as kind of harsh lighting and that sort of thing, and noir, I think, is fascinating. I'm gonna talk a little bit about noir, since this is our kind of last real noir we're gonna talk about for a while. Noir is fascinating because it's such an aesthetic that then became a series of kind of plot devices that then fed back into the aesthetic. Even probably the last of the, well, not the last, but even like The Third Man, kind of the use of like the long shadows and that sort of thing, and the streets of Vienna is very much taken from these same kind of ideas. But you're also talking about you talk about M, that's in 31, and then you're talking about these that are 13 years later and shot in English, and kind of later in the sound era, and then we're talking about the stuff from like the 40s and the 50s, and even down to Blast of Silence from 61, and you do see a progression of like the way that the films are kind of treating these. We didn't do them in order, but you see, like, you connect M to Blast of Silence, and then you go, well, Hangover Square kind of is just halfway in between those two, where Blast of Silence, you've got the what's the character's name, Ralphie,
in Blast of Silence.
Yeah.
Frankie Bono. Ralphie's the fat guy. Yeah,
the fat guy. Well, you see Frankie Bono, who is kind of aping the stuff, who's kind of aping the private eyes that we see in, things like the Chandler things that we talked about. But then you see like the Ralphie character, who is kind of almost the kind of comic, more kind of grounded version of what Laird Cregar was playing in these two films, because you see him as kind of connected to this idea of he's kind of dirty, he's kind of not necessarily a nice guy, but he's not like a serial killer, but you see very much hints of the same kind of performance. And the idea that this is not kind of a continuum, the idea that it has to be one thing is something that I don't know, it's hard. Sorry, I'm talking too much again. But I think it's hard for us today to sink ourselves into this era and say what's really going on for audiences at the time, because we kind of see them in isolation. And so I think for me, part of what I've learned from going through this, because I've always kind of loved noir for its aesthetics, but actually watching a bunch of it kind of at a time has really kind of shown me how much all of this is a school of aesthetics and a school of filmmaking, rather than like, oh, there's one filmmaker. Like Fritz Lang is a genius. He was a genius, but not necessarily like he didn't invent everything. And Brahms is a genius here. I mean, this final sequence in Hangover Square is just one of those great film sequences, like in anything. But you can't say like, oh, he just invented that out of whole cloth. It comes out of this school of thought. It's also like, once you see a bunch of noir, I think I lose a little bit of respect for Hitchcock. Not that he isn't a genius, but Hitchcock gets a lot of credit, partly because of the Truffaut book, for inventing some of this stuff. And Hitchcock definitely didn't invent this stuff. I mean, he's coming out of a school just as much as everybody else was. He was just one of the best people in that school, and then he went on and did other stuff in the color era and that sort of thing. So
Hitchcock managed to draw a lot of these things together. Like, there's definitely the natural talent, there's definitely inventiveness in his stuff, but he drew from a lot. Like this is a guy who was making silent movies, so he's been along since the start of movies, basically, and he drew a lot from the stuff he saw going along, and he implemented it better than anyone else to a certain degree. That's more his claim to fame, I think, than anything, because you're right, a lot of his stuff is not original, but he is the most well-known because he implemented it to such a degree that it just sort of caught on.
Well, and he was a popular filmmaker. His films made money, and then he had the TV show, and I think, again, it's hard to look back and then put it back into its proper historical context. And from a new critical approach, it's not necessarily like you have to. I mean, I think you can enjoy Hitchcock or enjoy Hangover Square and kind of go, oh, it's not hard to watch Hangover Square and enjoy it on its merits regardless, without having it in the context. Mm-hmm. But understanding it within its context and understanding it within not just historical, but within the artistic context really deepens the film experience, I think like watching Darnell's performance, for instance, and understanding like this is not the way people, like, this is not how women acted in films in 1945.
Yeah.
Linda Darnell's doing something really, really special here.
She is, yeah.
And just Cregar's brilliant. We can all agree he's brilliant.
Yeah.
But Linda Darnell, she is just mesmerizing to me. I love her, and everything I've seen with her, I've loved her, and even if I didn't love the film. But I think this is one of her great roles and one of her great performances, and just a great film.
I totally agree. Just to summarize sort of my response to Cameron's sort of question there, I don't think necessarily there were big influences on this film from films around the decade. Like I think we kind of outlined the kind of through line from Alfred Hitchcock and Fritz Lang to this. I think we made a good case for that, but there's a lot in this film, both these films, The Lodger and Hangover Square, that I think I already kind of explained that I feel like, even though I don't have solid evidence of this, like, concrete evidence that this is all basically speculation, I think these films are kind of unheralded landmarks of inspiration to a lot of films 20 years from now, from when these films were made. I just see so much in the Giallo and the Corman films in the 60s from these films that I can't help but think that these films were kind of really the sort of germination of those kind of genres to some degree. I could be totally wrong. I mean, maybe Roger Corman never saw these fucking films. Maybe the Italian directors who did the Giallos never saw them.
The Lodger is such the Lodger in particular. I think Hangover Square maybe got overlooked, but the Lodger was such a financial success, and it was such like kind of based on that Jack the Ripper thing that I would find it hard to believe that filmmakers 15 years later or 10 years later wouldn't have at least seen it, had it in the back of their mind. And I think that again, Brahms. I mean, I really want to see more that this guy did because he's such a phenomenal director. I mean, and it may be that the last 15 minutes of Hangover Square are his masterpiece, and everything else is kind of it's fine, but it's so like it so prefigures so much of the stuff that we saw later on in the 50s and the 60s. In terms of the way that this kind of counterpoint of music and violence, the final 10 minutes remind me a lot of Inglourious Bastards, and I guarantee you fucking Tarantino's seen this.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
I mean, I don't say that in a negative way. I just mean we tend to kind of, and I think that this is also we were talking about my coworker who doesn't see old films, and I think that we do kind of beyond a certain point we kind of go, well, all films from the 40s kind of all look and sound the same, and they're kind of we kind of get an idea of what a 1940s noir kind of looks and feels like, but they're at the time you've got a lot of individual filmmakers and a lot of individual writers and directors and performers and everything who are doing their own individual work, and I think that it's kind of unfortunate to some degree. I mean, that's understandable, but it's kind of unfortunate to some degree that we feel like homogenized it in our kind of cultural memory. And one of the things that I'm trying to do is I follow some like Twitter feeds from people. There's a Twitter feed called the Nitrate Diva, which I would recommend that people follow. This is a woman who she's an expert on basically film noir, 40s film and that sort of thing, and really retweets a lot of really cool stuff and shares a lot of cool images from this era, and talks a lot about these kind of films. And she's given me a list of a lot of stuff that's kind of on my short list to watch because it looks kind of fascinating. So check that out. That's a Twitter recommendation, the Nitrate Diva. I'll try to give you maybe. I'm sure Lee's about to find it and he'll give you a link. But
we'll link it in the show notes for sure. Fuck yes. That's great.
Lee just looked it up and went, "Fuck."
I actively hate people who think that everything in the 40s and 50s and later than that or earlier than that is homogenized, because that's fucking bullshit. I think, if anything, our sort of exploration into noir, and I guess we could even argue that we started with M, and we just did the sort of 50th Dawn of the Dead show as this sort of a one-off, and I would include M into our sort of noir crime series that we did. I think we kind of sort of explored that the fact that a lot of this shit is incredibly diverse. There's a lot of interconnections. There's a lot of influences between the films. It's not homogenized at all. There is a lot of there's a lot of difference between a lot of the films we watched, and there's a lot of nuances. There's a lot of differences that just come out in every film we've watched and talked about in this sort of series, and I'm really fucking happy that we did it, because we really dug into a lot of stuff. You brought up a lot of stuff for us to watch that otherwise I probably never would have watched, and it opened my eyes to a lot of stuff in the genre that I actually thought I knew some stuff about, and watching some films that you recommended even opened my eyes more. So it was a lot of fucking fun to get into all this stuff.
Well, I do this podcast just for you to tell me how brilliant I am. So thank you, Lee. But for me, it's very much a like a back and forth because ultimately we all have our things that we know and the things that we kind of talk about and the eras that we're interested in and the genres that we're interested in. And then part of what this show is, at least for me, is sharing it with each other. And if other people are listening, like, that's great. But like, this just forces me to sit and watch some stuff that I wouldn't necessarily otherwise like. Oh yeah, I'm really looking forward to watching like 80s slashers. But yeah, there were some great 80s slashers. I mean, Just Before Dawn, like I'm like, holy shit, Just Before Dawn, that was great. So I'm really happy. Finding Hangover Square was like, Lee needs to fucking see this movie. Like, that was, that was on my mind. Oh yeah, we're gonna do Hangover Square. And I really like that this episode has become almost like a meditation about noir and about our experience with noir, because I think noir gets a little bit overlooked among people kind of talking about stuff. I think people are really used to kind of talking about like stuff from the 70s, and they're very used to kind of talking. But there's some really great stuff here from the 30s and 40s and 50s that I think people really do overlook. Probably because it's in black and white. I think people just have this kind of bias against black and white, which is fucking bullshit because I fucking love black and white. That's a rant for another day.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll leave it at that. And yeah, we're going to be doing Inherent Vice next week. That will be the sort of cap off to our noir crime series. And then of course we're going to be going to some sci-fi films for a little while, maybe like 2 episodes or something like that. We'll just do a couple of sci-fi films, and then we're going to get straight into fucking more sex comedies, which has sort of been. I think our sex comedy series was the one that really sort of gained us attention. That was the first series that really sort of got our podcast out there and got people listening to it, strangely enough.
It's the thing, right? It's all my fault. I was the one who's like, let's do some sex comedies. And then suddenly, you're like, all right, fine. And then people start listening to us. Maybe you should listen to me more, Lee. It's a thing. No, Lee does the perfect amount of listening to me, where he listens to me with half an ear and then does what the fuck he wants to do. This is his podcast. If it's successful or not, it's because Lee has made it happen. All I do is drink too much and talk too much on this show.
Yeah.
So,
but I will say with the sex comedy series, you basically just sort of tapped into my perverted interests that I otherwise would not expound upon. Unless I think
I've done enough expounding upon my perverted interests on this show. But speaking of that, next week we have Inherent Vice coming up, and there is an actress with a bit part in that who had another career. And since I have been challenged in terms of bringing up the levels of my perversity, I didn't get a chance to write it up this week. But next week I will summarize the career of a certain actress. And I will definitely do more to pervert this show than any horsecock ever could. That's my goal.
Okay, so it's going to be next week, because I thought I was going to put aside some time for you to talk this week about that actress. But if it's going to be next week, great.
It'll be next week, and it might be included in my plot summary. We'll see if I do it in the plot summary, just as an aside, or if I do it separately. We'll see how when I end up writing that plot summary. If you want to listen to me talk for 10 minutes about this film uninterrupted, I'll do a little 3-minute bit in the middle, because this plot is I already am dreading writing this plot summary.
Yeah.
This might be another big sleep. Just to let people know.
But yeah, look forward to that, guys. It's going to be a big sort of finale to our little initial drop into this series, and it should be a lot of fun. Daniel, tell people about not only your Doctor Who podcast, but your Red Dwarf podcast that you're doing now.
Well, it's probably easier. So I have kind of started a new website. You can go to oispaceman.com. You will be able to find all of our future content there. I think They Must Be Destroyed on Sight is going to start to be posted there as well.
Yes.
Starting, in the next, maybe not this episode, but going forward, probably this episode as well. So, We'll see. But just go to alwayspaceman.com. I have done a Doctor Who podcast with my wife for over 2 years. It's highly political and lefty, and we talk about sex a bunch, and we use a lot of dirty words. But we're also going to start doing that with other properties, and it's going to be a little bit more dynamic. We're doing a Red Dwarf kind of subheading, and that one's called Searching for Fushal. We did the first episode. We've had a lot of positive response. And we talked about Chasing Amy, the Kevin Smith film from 1997. And man, that's an intense episode. That is pretty crazy. That was hard for us to even record. But if you want to talk about the gender and sexual politics of Chasing Amy, I think that's something you should probably listen to, and I would love to hear what people have to say about it. But you can find links to all our stuff at oispaceman.com, and the old website is oispaceman.libsyn.com if you're listening to this and I haven't gotten everything kind of moved over yet. So go check it out.
And all I gotta say is that Chasing Amy episode makes the Kevin Smith episode we did for our sex comedy series look like a piece of shit.
and I totally, because I planned that Kevin Smith episode we did, and my wife just ruined everything we did for that one. It just like basically just wrap that up in a little ball and throw it aside because we got way more intense on that. So
yeah, but very good stuff. If you want to find us, of course, we are on Facebook. That is the best place to get in contact with us, get your comments read, get your suggestions heralded for the gods to piss upon. And you'll get the trailer at the end to tell you where to go and find all this stuff. And we're going to go out, of course, on the Bernard Herrmann soundtrack for Hangover Square, which is going to be very long, but it's going to be 10 minutes. And, if you're into that, listen to it. Thank you very much for listening to us. Thank you, Daniel, for joining me. We're going to end this now. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to They Must Be Destroyed on Sight. For links to the host's other stuff, as well as links to podcasts and websites of similar interest, please visit us at tmbdos.podbean.com. There you can find links to the YouTube version of our podcast, our iTunes page, as well as our Facebook group, which is the best way to get in touch with us and leave feedback. And if you do not listen, then to hell with you.